Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast. This is episode 200 with Dr. Jake, and I have to look at my fingers to make sure I'm saying this right. Mazulewicz. Was that anywhere close, Jake?
That was pretty darn close. Mazulewicz, you must have some Polish
Okay.
in you somewhere.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you, Jake. Thank you. So I wanted to have Jake on. I ran across one of his talks, and I really liked how he was able to look at doing a after action report, and just kind of because all of us kind of think about what we should be doing. A lot of times we're glossing over those things because we're really focused on the good stuff, and we're not always thinking, well, how could we get better? How could we somehow look at solving a problem in a different fashion? Um, how could we look at corrective actions? All that good stuff. And then I heard
Mhm.
a great story from Jake, which just kind of sealed the whole thing that he was doing. So Jake, if you could tell the folks a little bit about yourself, and we'll just dive right in.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Jake. I've been doing this work solo on my own for about 9 years now. Have kind of hung up my own shingle. I do consulting and keynote presentations and event reviews. And the bottom line is, I help technical experts prevent dangerous and expensive errors. That's it. That's pretty much what I do. I try to give real practical, usable techniques, skills, strategies, concepts. There's some theory. I do have a PhD, so I'm a recovering academic. So I do still like primary, verbatim quotes from primary sources, but I don't just go, here's 7 fascinating research studies. I go, here's 4 questions to ask to build psychological safety. Here's 5 questions to ask for an after action review, things like that. I work primarily with, I would say I work primarily in the energy industry, electric utilities, renewables, oil and gas, things like that, and all the contractors that support them. But I have done some also with U.S. Department of Energy scientific labs, which are some really neat, cool stuff. And then a smattering of other high risk, high hazard industries. And in previous, I quick background, I served about 10 years in a large electric utility in the safety and training department, where I learned a lot of this stuff or researched a lot of this stuff. But I take the real practical background from a previous life when I was young and immortal, and I was a firefighter for 3 years, volunteer firefighter, was an EMT, volunteer and paid, and was an Army paratrooper, technically Army National Guard, peacetime, never in combat, but learning and doing and living by those procedures. We didn't call it human performance or HOP or high reliability organizing, but that's a lot of what it was. So I draw from a lot of that when I teach and work with clients now.
Mhm,
That's kind of what I do.
mhm. Thank you, Jake. Thank you. Could you sit down and talk about the story that you had when you were a young firefighter and you kind of thought about the how to integrate the after action report?
So, yeah, so think about when you were young, right? When you were 19 years old, think about what you were doing. And if you went to college and took the college route, you're probably in college somewhere. And if you're like most people, and like I was back then, I'm like, well, is this all there is? I'm like, I'm wanting something more, something special, something different. Classes were interesting, getting to drink whenever I want to. Sometimes fake ID and stuff like that was nice, but it's like I want something more. And I wasn't into sports, and I wasn't the fraternity kind of guy. And I'm like, I went to a pretty small college. I'm like, well, what else is there to do? Well, I found a volunteer fire department, and that was on campus, but it served a 67 square mile first due. And if you're a
Wow.
firefighter or EMS, that's the area that we covered where we were first in. That's a huge
Yeah, that's
area.
huge. Yeah.
Most of it was rural, right? So it's a long
Mhm.
drive anyway. So it's the craziest thing I ever did. I've never done anything like dangerous like that before. I didn't tell my parents. They actually had a student die in the line of duty the year before I got there. That's how real it was. This wasn't a club. It was an accident. Unfortunately, a bit somebody got killed. I didn't tell my parents that when I joined up. So I joined up.
Mhm.
I went through the training, right? Of course, a couple of weeks of training on and off, it's all volunteer, so it's when you can. And then I remember going on my first call, and my first call was a dumpster fire.
Mhm.
Literally a dumpster fire. Now you may have been in meetings where you say, "Man, this is a dumpster fire." I've been on an actual dumpster fire. And there are a couple of meetings I've been in have been almost that bad. So yes, you're not completely wrong on that.
Yeah.
They can be that bad. But I didn't do much on that call because I was fresh out of training. I was qualified to, carry hose and air tanks, right? But I watched, these 12 or 15 people do this kind of orchestrated maneuvers, which was planned and yet spontaneous at the same time, because every fire is different. And I just went, man, I want more of this. I don't know exactly what they're doing. I went through the training, so I knew some, but I'm like, it's almost like they're communicating with telepathy. And there was some hand signals and other communication, but it's like they really worked as a team. I was 19 years old and I'd never been part of an organization like that. And I went, I want more of this. I want the gear, the trucks, I mean, the stuff, the camaraderie. And I thought, well, that's all the good stuff that I get from this. Well, we finished up the fire, we packed up the trucks, and we drove home, and we cleaned off the turnout gear, we recharged the air tanks and stuff like that, and put new hose in the hose base. And I thought, okay, well, I guess that's it. I guess we go home now. But no, a guy named Tim kind of buttonholed me and said, no, we're not done yet. You're the new guy. And I'm like, oh, great. This is hazing or something. No.
Mhm.
And he pulled me and about 9 or 10 other people into a room. And the chief was there. It's a small room. And it wasn't everybody who was on the fire, but most people. And the chief, and I thought, okay, the chief's now going to tell us, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? Stuff like that. And that's not what happened. What happened over the next 30 or so minutes was probably the most engaging and fascinating conversation I think I'd ever been in my life at 19 years old. The chief wrote up, his name was Ken, and he wrote up on the old slate chalkboard, old, green slate chalkboard, 4 questions. What did we set out to do? Was number one. Two was, what did we actually do? Three was, how did it turn out the way that it did? And four was, what are we going to do differently next time? And then the chief shut up. And that's when I kind of went, well, wait a second. I thought he has all the answers. And he didn't speak up, but everybody else spoke up. The lead guys on the attack line crew, they spoke up and they said, here's what we saw when we opened the lid to the dumpster. The people doing traffic control spoke up and they said, here's what we kind of noticed. We didn't expect to see a couple surprises. The pump operator spoke up and said, yeah, you thought we were doing fine on water, but let me tell you what, this almost happened. And my mind was blown because so many almost things happened or things almost happened, but that I didn't even notice. The water never stopped flowing, the crews never stopped moving, and I didn't know what went, and I would have never known what had gone almost wrong if we hadn't done that thing. And so I'm listening mostly on that discussion. We finish up 30, maybe 40 minutes later, and we finish up, and then we go home. And before we leave, I turned to Tim, the guy who kind of got me in there, and I said, "Do you guys do that after every fire?" And he said, "Well, maybe not after every one, but we try to do it after most fires." And I said, "What was that?" And he said, "My friend, you have just been through your first after action review." And that's what it was. And I came back and I realized as I'm walking away, I'm full of insights and questions. And like, there's no way they could ever build a training that would be as good as that conversation, right? Because it was real. It was from something that we just remembered. We all had the same memories because we literally an hour before we're all on the same site together. We remembered things mostly the same way, not always, and we just discussed and shared the insights. And it wasn't, oh, you screwed up or you forgot this. It was just mostly what worked well and then what we could do differently in the next time. Um, and that was my first AAR, and that was in oh 1987,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
long time ago. And I was hooked. If I wasn't hooked for the gear and the camaraderie and the feeling of, putting the wet stuff on the red stuff, as they say, I was hooked on the after action reviews. And I came back and I, after a while, started leading the after action reviews because you learn how to do that. And then in my naivete, I kind of went, this is so cool. After I get out of college, I'm looking forward to working for companies that do this. I thought every company did after action reviews.
Right.
And then I got out in the real world and I went, what? No, I missed that little fire department, which was decades ahead of its time.
Mhm.
And in some ways, kind of what the job I have today is in some ways kind of recreating the culture of that amazing little fire department from 30 years ago that doesn't even really exist anymore. And a big reason they did that was the after action reviews. That was my first after action review. That's what we got started on it. I got it again in the military when I joined up and enlisted in the military, and I went, this is really familiar. I've already done these, but it was new to many people. They're like, oh, you were ex fire and rescue? Yeah. And I've tried to share it with everybody else kind of since then because they're so versatile, they're non-punitive, and they just work really well. That's it. I hope that wasn't too long, but that was kind of
Oh no, that's
yeah.
great. That's great. That's great. So I had tried to do it at a couple different companies, and I
Yeah.
just never got the traction. I did find that some people were just like, "All right, it's over. Let's just get back to doing what we're paid to do," because
Mhm.
we're obviously not paid to clean up chemical spills and that kind of stuff. That is part of our job, but
Mhm.
in theory, we shouldn't be spilling stuff to have to go back
Mhm.
and clean up stuff. So a lot of people were very focused on we have to get back to our prime job.
Mhm.
Um, every so often I could get a little bit of time to say, well, why don't we talk about a lessons learned? So we can
Mhm.
all kind of sit down. And that was a very tiny version of the AAR, but
Mhm.
not really a full blown so when I was also in
Mhm.
the Army, I did find that it worked out awesome and I loved it and it was great. And that's also where I got hooked on this whole thing. I
Yeah.
was just never really able to make that jump over. I was able to
Mhm.
kind of bastardize it some, but it's
Mhm.
still not like a full blown thing.
A
So
an old friend of mine said something that I've never heard anybody else say it, but it's true, I think. And he said, in the military, you could do things that you can't do anywhere else.
mhm.
But in the military, you can't do things that you can do everywhere else. And if you can wrap your head around that, then it might be a job for you, and that's it. And one of the things that you can do is we debrief after every mission. Now, not every unit does this, but what I learned after, as the years kind of went by, and I realized not many people do this, the after action reviews were invented in the late 1970s, I think, by the Army War College, essentially, as a way to debrief big force on force missions, right?
Oh,
War
okay.
games, right? Way before computers and technology and surveillance and everything. And it's like, well, what did you learn? And what they realized was you can send guys and women through, 2 weeks of mock battle, and you may get tons of insights, but they're locked up inside people's heads.
Right,
And what
exactly.
they realized was just because you've had an experience, one doesn't mean you're going to apply it next time. And two, it doesn't mean that the guy or woman next to you knows it. So we need a process. And it was the Army. So they came up with a process. And it was this non punitive, I call it a non punitive, semi structured post job debrief.
That is a
And
great way to talk about it and describe it.
yeah. That was it. So I got started doing it, but I had your similar problems, which was if people have never done it before, they kind of go, this is weird. Why are we sitting down and talking when nothing went wrong?
Oh,
Right.
yes, yes, yes. I've heard that same thing too before. Yes,
Have
exactly.
you seen
Hmm.
that like a crew? Like if something goes wrong, then it's like, okay, now we need to sit down and talk about it. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Because something went wrong. Yeah,
But
exactly.
but here's the cycle. Here's the feedback loop you get into, the bad one. If all you do is talk about jobs, if the only time you talk about jobs is when they went wrong, then as soon as you sit down and say, all right, guys, folks, we need to talk about this, what's the emotional reaction going to be?
Oh, it's going to be bad, you know.
How do we get through this? How do we get nobody say nothing? Let's just say give one word answers like a lawyer in a deposition, do you
Right,
have the
right,
time?
right, right.
Yes, that's
Mm-hmm.
it.
Right,
And then
right.
we'll get out of this thing as soon as we can. And what that teaches people is don't communicate.
Oh,
So
yes. Hmm.
when all you do is debrief jobs that go badly, you condition people to shut up, to not communicate. But
Yes.
when you go, that's the bad feedback loop. The good feedback loop is when you debrief jobs that go well, and you're asking people, "Hey, Bill, I you did something out there. I'm not sure what it was, but it wasn't. What? Tell me what you did there to kind of keep the water flowing when the trucks were there. I didn't think we had enough water. How'd you manage that?" Now you're putting Bill on the spot, but you're saying take credit for that really cool idea that pretty much nobody does except you. You're giving Bill permission to say, well, here's what I had, and he thought the idea, and now Bill gets to be the superhero.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you gave him permission to take the credit for it, and so he does that. And that's it. And other people catch on and kind of go, "Hey, I did a couple of cool things too," and they want to tell you about them. And
Right.
then it builds into this, "Hey, I want to share. It's non-punitive. Way to go, Bill. Awesome. You know what? I can use that." And it spirals from there.
Oh
Does
yeah.
do you see that happen? Oops.
Um, To a degree, yes. Sometimes the guys aren't really wanting to sit down and talk because they have been beaten down. They have been,
Oh.
just so history has taught them that when somebody says, "Well, we have to talk about something," it's really bad. So I found that after I kind of get over that hump of, well, we're talking because we want to get better, of course, too, and
Hmm.
not just because there's always something that you can work on, but there's also really great things that you can share with
Hmm.
folks too. Because if you're operating at multiple sites, you might be doing the same thing wrong in multiple sites, just like you could also be doing the same great thing at multiple sites. But if nobody's talking, it's just not being shared.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that insight, that wisdom gets locked up in people's heads.
Mhm.
And a lot of times people do want to share it. Sometimes people want to be like, "No, I don't want to share my insights. That's my secret." Okay, fine. But
Mhm.
a lot of times people realize we all do better when we all do better.
Right.
Right. And this is, or as some of my Navy friends say, there's no such thing as saying, "Hey, there's a hole in your side of the boat." That
Oh, that is a great saying.
it doesn't work that way. It's like that may be your side of the boat, but a hole in your side of the boat is a hole in my boat too. For some things, we need to work together on this.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is a great saying. I'm gonna try and weave that into everyday talk more.
Try
That's
that.
really good.
I don't
Wow.
know the source of that. I try to source my quotes. I don't know the source for that one. I mean, it's obviously it's a Navy one or Coast Guard. I'm not sure, but
Right,
yeah,
right, right, right. I have a lot of quotes, and I tell folks that I probably did not come up with what I'm saying. I found it someplace. So
yeah.
I don't want folks to think that I'm this brilliant guy who came up with this stuff. I just heard it someplace and thought about it, and now I'm saying it too. So,
You share and you give credit, and that's the best we can do. And we hope that people, kind of quote us when we give something good. So yeah,
right, right,
yeah.
right, right. So I have found out that if you do a AAR and you're sitting down and you're talking about the good stuff, it's also a very nice way to sit down and make yourself a checklist and say, all right, here's the
Mhm.
stuff that I need to add to the checklist. Because in the ideal world, we think about everything at all times, but maybe it's better to have a checklist too, just to kind of help you to think about the things that
Mhm.
maybe does not apply in every situation, but maybe it does apply. And I found it's also a nice way to look at things like corrective actions and kind of say, all right, so how do we get better in what we're doing? Are
Mhm.
we going to practice actual hands-on? Is it more of just a procedural thing that we have to do? Is it, just kind of that stuff too? That's that really helps me out at least.
When crews or teams tend to do their after action reviews pretty regularly, and I mean like maybe once a week, that's a good general rule of thumb, is do an after action review 20, 30 minutes, maybe once a week. It doesn't need to be too much more than that.
Right,
But if you get too much less than that, it's almost like the equivalent of like working out. Like if you go to the gym once a month, are you really going to see any improvement?
right,
Probably not.
right,
Twice
right,
a month, not so much. You start going once a week, then you may start seeing a little improvement. You do a couple of times a week, then you're starting to get better. Same
right,
thing for after action reviews. And what I find, kind of like what you said, is when the crews or the teams figure out their own solutions and they go, "Hey, you know what? This might be a great place for a checklist." They come up with it, they will go and put it into use like that. But
right.
if somebody, on the outside, or some CEO or a senior manager or outside consultant says, "You should use a checklist," they're going to go, "No, it's not for us." You
Oh,
want
right,
another
right. Yeah.
great quote is, I think an old trainer, Bob Pike, said, "People don't argue with their own conclusions."
Oh, that is a good one.
And if when people do after action reviews, they've got the time, the space, the energy, and the opportunity to come up with their own solutions. regularly. And if they don't come up with it this week, no worries. If it's an important thing, they'll come up with it next week or the week after the week after.
Mhm.
And stuff like checklists, you can do that under the radar and just make it informal, do it yourself. That's where the really good improvements come from. It's
Right.
not as some people call it, you might have called it this earlier, an after action report.
Hmm.
That's, I'd say be careful and make sure you call it an after action review,
Right.
because
Hmm.
the thing is the discussion. That's where the power is, in the discussion. Not It's not a form to fill out, for Pete's sake. And
Right.
if something comes out of it, like here's some notes, that's great. That's icing on the cake. But the real power is the discussion by the group for the group.
Right. 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 And
Yeah.
anytime that somebody can find something and correct something and they found it, it's going to happen. You know, if
Yeah.
if I show up and I blow in and I'm like, hey, I've been kind of thinking you guys should do the following things. Well, not that that doesn't have merit, but for most people it doesn't because I'm a person that they don't know.
Yeah.
I just blew in and said, hey, the following things have got to be changed, and then I take off.
Hmm. It's a bit like kids. I have two teenagers, and I can give what I think is the most powerful, wise stuff I can. And even if I know it's good, if it's not, if they don't have a need at that time, what I find is it either rolls off. I mean, like water off a duck's back, as they say, or what they'll do is kind of like, all right, fine. And I think they'll forget about it, but they don't, but they store it. And then a month later, 2 months, 3 months later, I'll see them doing it. And I'll be like, you little, you remembered that. But the last thing I can ever do is go up and say, hey, I'm glad you did that thing that I told you to do. If I do that, it's over.
Right, exactly.
Again, if it's their idea, they'll own it.
Right,
And all I get to go is that quiet smile of pride, maybe a glass of wine sometime going, I think I did okay. And
right.
that's it.
Exactly, exactly.
And you do that a lot with your crews too. It's a nudge, it's a whisper, it's not a shove. And you let them come up with it as much as practical, you know?
Right, 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 right. I found that they really have to solve their own issues and their own problems, because it's, again, I can sit down and do it for them. It's not really the same, you know.
No.
And I have found that it seems like most people have the answer to solving it, and they have a hard time with either self-confidence. Maybe they've been taught that, well, that's not your role. You just worry about
Hmm.
working this like production line, somebody else can solve problems. But a lot of people really already know that answer. They just don't have
Yeah.
that power to
Yeah.
really go back and say, I'm going to fix it myself, because
Hmm.
that's where they truly have power is not even asking us, just do it.
Hmm. One of the best compliments I get when I'm giving my workshops or presentations or event reviews is people coming up to me afterwards saying, hey, Jake, I've been doing your model of, for example, situational awareness, your scan and focus model
Mhm.
for years, if not decades. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know there was any research behind it. I've never had a name for it, but now I do. And that's when I know I'm doing something right. When some expert who figured it out on their own, we both figured it out. Me from my experience, them from theirs, but we
Mhm.
came up to the same idea. I was able, because of my background, to put a label on it and I make it concise and teach it. And
Right,
they've been doing it. And then it's like, that's a fist bump, man. We got this. Now just share it.
right.
But I love being able to give stuff like that. But instead of saying you have to do this, I've always been in positions of no power. I've been at manager level positions, but with no staff, just an independent, almost like an internal company consultant.
Oh, yes, yes,
I've
exactly.
led projects, but I've never kind of led a big department or a small department. I've always had to work for the power. I've never been able to say, you're going to do this and you're going to like it because I'm your boss. I've never been able to do that. I've always had to go, well, consider doing this, or what would happen if you did this? It's a nudge and it becomes their idea generally. And a lot of that happens with after action reviews. People do it with each other, you know.
Right, 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 right.
Um,
I, um,
yeah.
I like to think that if I was a young safety professional, again, I think my attitude would be that I work with everybody and not for anybody. You know,
Yeah.
I think I would like that a whole lot more because when you're just one person, you're not going to be in charge of anybody. So you really have
Yeah.
to use that influence. You have to go
Yeah.
out. You have to actually know folks. You just
Hmm.
can't show up and say, "Hey, you in the red shirt, I want you to go do the following thing." I mean,
Yeah.
that's not going to help your point. That doesn't mean that they won't do it, but it's not the same as when they want to do it, of course.
I think some people have called it soft power as opposed to hard
Oh,
power. I don't know
yes.
if that's
Hmm.
more kind of at the organizational or even international level. I think of like diplomacy, like military is hard power. You're going to do this because we're the guys with the guns. But
Right.
soft power is more, hey, we'd love for you to do this. Can we work together? Because it'd be better for everybody. We can't force you to, but here's why it might be better. And
Right.
that's where the negotiations, and like you said, you can get people to do things or you can get people to want to do things. It is way
Exactly.
better to get people to want to do things.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. Because I can show up and say everybody's got to do the following thing, but I'm busy, so I have to leave eventually. And then people would just go back and do their old thing again. It has to be something that they want to do, of course.
they get to feel it kind of,
Um,
and that's you can know something intellectually, like I know I need to do this, but there's a continental divide kind of and it's like crossing over and going, I get it emotionally, like I really
yeah.
get it. When I do workshops or even kind of my presentations on after action reviews, when I first started out by just kind of giving the basics of it, and then this is several years ago, I started giving a practice. So even in an hour, the presentation that I do, I did this, for example, for Energy Safety Canada a couple of years
Mhm.
ago. I did the #2 keynote. It was right behind Todd Conklin. And it was on day one, and it was about 850 people in the audience, so big audience.
Oh, awesome.
And I had just an hour to do after action reviews. I told the firefighter story,
Mhm.
and then I gave them the basics, the 4 questions and a couple of tips, common traps to avoid, rookie mistakes, and how to avoid them. And then we had about 20 minutes left. And I said, so your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to do an after action review. And I'd cleared all this with the organizers, but I said, we're going to do an activity. They went, you're going to do an activity with 850 people? I said, yes. They went, okay.
Mhm.
I had one slide of instructions, clear, simple, specific to the point. Turn to a partner, do this, pick a job, ask these questions, spend about 2 minutes per question, watch the clock, do this, boom, ready, go. Any questions? Give me a thumbs up if you got it. It's 800 people giving me a thumbs up is pretty cool.
Very cool.
Boom, we
Yeah.
did it. And
Uh-huh.
I got to take a break for about 8 minutes and I'm watching and listening around. And it's like the whole room is like this. And then after that, we finish up and I always tend to ask the same question, which is, what surprised you about that 10-minute experience? And just like you said earlier, that's when they come up and say, some people have said, I am surprised by how fast that time went. I'm usually bored. I usually walk out of things. I'm usually checking my phone and activities. I hate doing that. And they said 10 minutes went like that.
Yep, exactly.
And so other people will say, I was surprised because I was in a group with like 4 people, and three of them, the other 3 people had no idea about my job. But we debriefed one of my jobs and they still gave me good input, even though they knew nothing about my technical job. That surprised me. That's people getting it emotionally, just like you suggested,
Mhm.
that I could never put up on a slide and give them. Does that
Right,
make any
right.
sense?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yeah. Oh yeah,
So, yeah.
exactly. So Jake, we are having a great talk, but we are
Yeah.
bumping up on time.
Yeah.
Could you take couple of seconds and let folks know how that they can find you, connect, to get more info out
Sure.
there. And then at some point I want to have you back for your situational awareness one, and
Oh, yeah.
we'll take care of that one on
Let's
different
do that a
episodes.
different time. That's a
Yes.
great story too. So people can get in touch with me easily on the web. My website is reliableorg.com, right? Reliableorg.com. Name of my company is JMA Human Reliability Strategies, kind of a green and blue logo. You'll see it on there. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. So look up my name, Mazulewicz. You'll see it there and just spell it. Not a whole lot of us out there. I
That's
think a
right.
couple of my cousins have it. But look me up on there, connect with me on LinkedIn. And I do a lot of stuff virtually. But the things that I do are I do workshops, anywhere from half day to 2 day workshops. I do keynotes for big groups, small groups, anywhere in North America, including Canada now. And event reviews. Obviously, when something goes wrong, I have a process that's not a root cause analysis because human behavior doesn't have a root cause, but I have a
Oh,
different process to go through it.
very
And that's kind of
good.
it. So
Very
that's
good. Wow.
yeah, that's it. And I help technical experts reduce or excuse me, prevent dangerous and expensive errors. That's what I do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Fantastic, Jake. And with that, episode number 200 is over. I want to
All
thank
right.
everybody for joining me today. My name is Dr. David Ayers. Thank you and have a safe day.